Hello and welcome to the Ori Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Jason Foster. Today with me is Isabelle Riviere. She's the director of and Michael G. Harris Cell and Gene Therapy Engineering Lab at MSK, Memorial Sloan Kettering. Welcome, Isabelle.
Good morning, Jason. Very nice to be with you this morning. I will be very pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks so much. Would love everyone, I think, in the world knows, unless they've been hiding under a rock, that Sloan Kettering is one of the leading cancer centers in the world. Would love to learn a bit more about your background and what led you into the field that you're in, and also some of the work that you're leading at MSK, if that's okay.
Yes, so I've been in the field for over almost 3 decades. I started to be interested in cell and gene therapy during my early PhD in France. I was lucky enough to have a visionary advisor who wanted to treat AIDS with gene therapy and hematopoietic stem cells, expressing some antiviral genes such as interferons. So it was a great opportunity for me to get my first dive into gene therapy and hematopoietic cells. And so I started the work at the Institut Curie in Paris, and I ended continuing the work at MIT and Cambridge. And subsequently, I went to NYU in New York, where I did a postdoc in immunology with Dan Littman, where I learned a lot of the biology that we is very useful today to try to manipulate and the T cells and other cells of the immune system, and trying to improve their fitness to treat cancer. And finally, I was recruited at Sloan Kettering about 2 decades ago, a little more. And there I did set up the GMP facility to manufacture plasmids and cells. I was basically given in 1998 the keys of a small GMP facility, or small by today's standards, I guess, 4 clean rooms. And I had one technician at the time. And over the years, I built the operations, the process, the quality assurance, quality control, production teams, and now we're a group of more than 40 people delivering mostly cell products, genetically engineered cell products to patients.
Mm-hmm. And most of the work that you're doing, is it with sponsors, external companies, or mostly internal research, or a little bit of both? What does the mix look like?
Early on, we were really working purely as academics with either NIH, NCI funding, and foundations. This was really the groundwork that we had to do, because there was absolutely no company, industry, pharmaceutical company, or biotech that were interested in cell therapies back in 2000.
Mm-hmm. Luckily, that's changed.
Yes, it has changed. It took a very long time.
Yes.
We were told for many years that this was impossible approach, that would not work, that you could not retrofit cells to become drugs. And so we had to stick to it for many, many years until we had a proof of concept in 2003 in an animal model of leukemia, where we demonstrated that the CAR T cells could be really very active in controlling and eradicating systemic tumors. And this was a publication in Nature Medicine by Branchens and Sadlin, which really opened the door for us and allowed us to do the proof of concept in human 5 years later.
Yeah, it must be incredibly gratifying to have 20 or 30 years of hard graft come good. And I think Bruce Levine was our very first podcast guest and gave us a little bit of the historical reference point as well. But you've obviously been in the field. I joked with him, and you guys were in it before it was cool.
Oh, much before. It wasn't cool at all at the time.
Yes, yes, but it's definitely cool now, and having incredible clinical benefit for patients, which is awesome. And wanted to add as well that given your wealth of experience, Ori is incredibly lucky to have you as a member of our scientific advisory board and an advisor to the company, and has been great getting to know you over the last year. Although it feels like maybe longer because we've been in COVID times, but it's great to be able to work with one of the leaders and in the pioneers in the space. So just to let everyone know that that's happening publicly for the first time, which is great. Can you tell us a little bit about, I think you're going to come on to it, about some of the work you're doing currently at MSK? What are the kind of some of the trends in cell and gene therapy that you think are most interesting that you guys are working on, or that you're seeing other labs work on? I'd be keen to know from your perspective.
Well, at Sloan Kettering, we have a number of clinical trials which are homegrown, which involve CAR T cells, and both in the autologous setting and hopefully the homegrown projects in the allogenic setting will also be launched in the very near future. So we've been treating patients with both hematological tumors as well as solid tumors now more recently. Over the years, we have probably carried more than 15 clinical trials and treated over 500 patients. We had a breakthrough in 2014 after we treated 5 patients with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. These were adult patients, and in which we really witnessed the eradication of the tumors within days post infusion, to the point that we thought this was an artifact and that the technician had forgotten to put the antibodies
You
in
couldn't
the
believe your
tube as
eyes.
we were looking for the tumor in the bone marrow that has disappeared within 11 to 22 days.
Wow.
So this was really an incredible moment to see the power of those therapies in patients. And subsequently, we have carried a number of clinical trials, not only in patients with ALL, but also chronic lymphocytic leukemia, myeloma, non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And now we are also treating patients with solid tumors such as mesothelioma, triple negative breast cancer, and we're gearing towards other applications in the field of solid tumors. We're also expanding in the field of liquid tumors and hematologic tumors, treating patients with AML, which is one of the forefront right now, also where there is large unmet medical need. We have a strong internal group who are working on the design of new chimeric antigen receptors with new signaling domains and new combinations that are have the goal of overcoming some of the immune suppressive environment in solid tumors and trying to overcome all the barriers that solid tumors present, which are even more difficult to overcome than the hematological tumors. So we're designing really new signaling domains and new combinations with other therapeutic agents. In terms of the allogenic, we have developed T cells derived from induced pluripotent stem cells, and we have an internal program that we hope to bring to clinical trials in the next year. We also have collaborators such as Fate Therapeutics, who have initiated clinical trials at MSK based on the technology that we have worked on together as well. So we're very excited about the allogenic approaches, which should definitely broaden the access if we can get these cells to persist long enough and do the same type of work as the autologous cells, but in a much more practical and manner.
Wow, huge body of work going on at Sloan Kettering, and obviously, solid tumors certainly are kind of the big next phase. We think, obviously, I think there's something like 2,500 clinical trials going on around the world in cell and gene therapy. Many of them focused in trying to solve the solid tumor challenge. Obviously, one that would have a huge patient impact if we were able to get it right. I've got a question, and excuse my ignorance in advance of asking this question. It's probably a dumb question, but traditionally, the role of academic research or academic medical centers like Sloan Kettering has been to, as you've been saying, develop new modalities, new approaches, and also to test others' approaches. In partnership with clinical trial sponsors. Increasingly, we've had Jason Bach from MD Anderson on the podcast recently. We talked to John Connolly at Pisces. It seems as though some of these different institutions are thinking about maybe a little bit differently about their role and involving it to think about not only about early stage research and development or clinical trials, but even maybe moving towards manufacturing and treating patients themselves. I'm curious about your view on that and whether that is actually a trend or I'm grasping at straws and putting two and two together where there really isn't anything. But I'd be curious about kind of where academic research you think plays a role potentially, AMCs in both research and also manufacturing.
Yes, I think it's a complex issue with really novel models of um, thinking about care and
Hmm.
healthcare in hospitals. Traditionally, as you said, the medical centers are really involved in the early stages, phase one discovery, and that has been really the major role early on at MSK, where we were really treating patients with our own homegrown CAR T cells, which were designed internally. There was really no other way to get at it, considering that, as I mentioned earlier, there was no industry interest and there was not the knowledge background that we now have on the feasibility of these approaches. Today, we definitely can see that the medical centers are also taking on clinical trials, which are with products that are developed with companies or biotechs, because those are developing products which address unmet medical needs in certain diseases, and they definitely need to be tested and investigated in the clinical setting, and that's a great way to be able to bring new treatments to replace suboptimal standard of care. But in terms of medical centers developing their own products and being able to perform multi-center clinical trials, this can, in my view, get somewhat complicated. I think there will be new structures that need to be put in place. I mean, really undertaking a phase two and beyond clinical trial in a medical center for a disease which has a large number of patients would take a lot of resources. So I think, and not only in terms of manufacturing, but then you have to think about everything around manufacturing, which has to do with a supply chain, management of the supply chain, management of the patients, management of all the clinical trial data, and that would require to be centralized or federated between different hospitals. It would be, in my view, very difficult to have a single clinical center manufacturing for all the other centers. So I think probably some kind of cooperations and agreements between medical centers with potentially regional locations, so kind of different poles to cover the country would be necessary because quality control will also need to be centralized, and unless you have a completely automated um, manufacturing, quality control, and storage platform, I would say. Not to also mention the chain of custody and the storage and cold chain that we need to maintain to distribute these products, which is one of the most complicated aspects besides manufacturing.
Indeed. Yeah, Venetti and Traxel are partners of Ori, and they do they do their job really well. It is complicated, the logistics around today's methodology. It is interesting though to think about, as you were saying, kind of maybe a centers of excellence model or a hub and spoke model where we've got regional coverage. Maybe I think the industry generally has agreed that centralized manufacturing, harvesting a patient's cells, flying them halfway across the world sometimes, processing them and flying them back probably isn't the path to scale that's going to work the best. So there's new models that are in need of development, and I know a lot of you and your peers think that the AMCs have a role to play. I think it's just a question of what role and how do we make it work. And as you said, we need automation. We need platforms where we can monitor in real time what's happening, under one quality system and prove to the regulator that it's a safe and high quality process. So we're not quite there yet, but hopefully Ori will do a little bit to help us move in that direction if we do our job right. So that's definitely the ambition.
Absolutely. We're counting on you and your technology to help us with that.
Well, it'll take a village for sure, the ecosystem of partners that we're building, because there's a lot of expertise required, as you know, to handle all the various pieces. But how has the role, in your view, has the role changed at all in the last decade, from what AMCs were doing before, kind of, and what they might need be called upon to do in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the role has already, definitely evolved. We have really gone from handling homegrown protocols where we developed a technology for manufacturing and local distribution to now we have created at Sloan Kettering service of cell therapies where there are many physicians who do not necessarily are involved in the design of conceptions of cell therapies and products, but are basically choosing to collaborate with a number of companies or biotechs who are proposing a menu of different early trials, which, as I mentioned earlier, can fulfill requirements for unmet needs in certain diseases. So definitely, there is now a menu of different protocols that are being undertaken, and this is definitely creating additional work and additional specialties in the medical centers. I mean, the really early on, the only services who were comfortable to distribute these products were really the bone marrow transplant services because they had handled cell manipulations, and even if they were minimal, and they knew how to move these products from one country to another, and internally then how to store them and infuse them and deliver them to patients. So right now, with other services are also learning how to become comfortable with those logistics. Additionally, I think in terms of the multi-center trials, there is definitely a need at the moment. There is very little mechanisms for medical centers themselves to initiate multi-center trials because first you would have to get the manufacturer at different centers to be able to fulfill the requirements of the numbers that of patients that need to be enrolled, and then again the logistics around organization of collection of data and tracking of products is complicated and still not solved. So these multi-center trials are really organized and supported right now still by pharmaceutical companies or biotechs. And we're not yet at the point where a medical center can take the lead on that. There's also all the liabilities that these centers have to take on if they manufacture a product and send it to a different center. And there's no clear path, from what I understand, in terms of getting a product commercialized, initiated by a medical center. That needs also to be defined and built.
Hmm. Thought through. We're seeing a little bit of a trend, and I'm not asking you to reveal any secrets here, but we're seeing a little bit of a trend where industry is partnering with medical centers. Like I think Thermo had a partnership that they announced with UCSF to build essentially a sidecar facility alongside the research center. National Resilience has announced a couple partnerships recently, one with Penn and one with Harvard, different flavors. And then just recently, I think maybe this week, I saw that Penn had struck an agreement with the Center for Breakthrough Medicine down in Pennsylvania. Do you see that as a trend that continues moving forward? Obviously you're in Manhattan. There's not a ton of space probably at where you are to build a GMP manufacturing facility. So, these kinds of partnerships seem to maybe make sense, but I wanted to get your thought on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be really important that these partnerships are built along the line, because these companies will be able to kind of propose a menu of operation units that are essential for the manufacturing of these products. And if you have a company who has basically kind of debug the different operation systems and can help these medical centers to bring them together in sequence that can be flexible, it will be very useful and really will accelerate the development of the products and the implementation of these technologies, because we find themselves at these early times to really spend a lot of time in trying to determine the compatibilities between systems and between operation units. And if others who have more experience in that field and who have the resources can help medical centers to really streamline the construction and building of these operation units in different sequences, I think it will be extremely helpful to have their support and partnership.
I mean, it seems to make sense, sort of specializing, specialization, letting the companies do what they do best and letting the researchers do what they do best and bringing those pieces together. And if you could potentially have a national network, which seems to be, in particular, National Resilience's ambition. They're buying facilities around the country and then maybe even internationally. I think they have some presence in Canada. If you're able to replicate those processes, that digital platform in multiple places, then you can imagine where we could run a multi-center trial potentially on the back of that infrastructure. So it's quite an interesting model to think about and potentially powers that regional center of excellence model if it does head in that direction. But there's definitely innovation needed at all phase at all pieces of the value chain to continue. I wanted to ask you a question in just from your perspective. Obviously, you have run and have been involved in cell and gene therapy manufacturing and the translation of academic processes into clinical readiness, and then I would assume also helping see them to commercial readiness as well as maybe they go out the door or with partners. What is I think we hear a lot about cost of goods being high. We hear a lot about highly variable quality, shall we say, not being able to necessarily control the quality and repeatability of the process that we might like, relatively low throughput, manual processes. What's your view as far as, what are the most significant barriers to treating patients at scale? I think everyone in the industry, we all got into this to help patients at the end of the day, and it's frustrating for all of us, I'm sure, that we have really clinically effective cell and gene therapies, but not that many patients can benefit from them. So, What's your view of the most significant barriers that are holding us back from really enabling widespread access for patients?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, really, we have the cost of goods and the cost of operators, manpower, which are the two major expenses. Obviously, the automation should bring us some relief, and also the monitoring and in real time and being able to monitor the parameters of the cultures and being able to get some immediate feedback on adjustments of metabolites, cytokines that would maintain this culture in the optimal stages. So, right now, there is some efforts to develop technologies that allow us to monitor in real time, just even the cell concentrations and cell numbers and really being able to sample in real time and doing the analysis of biomics, metabolomics to be able to follow the characteristic of the culture and provide feedback that will maintain these cultures in optimal stages. And the other would be to be able to, abort a process in the early times if the cultures are not behaving as they should according to specifications that are have been determined to be optimal. So I think there is lots of progress. I mean, the Georgia Tech University has a program with CMAT to look at different aspects of those, and I'm sure there are other programs that are working on those large scale initiatives and building in this into an automation unit from the selection of the cells to their transduction expansion and formulation would be really extremely useful. Of course, there's still some biology to work out at this time. I think that even if we have the ability to measure all these parameters in real time, we still have some work to do on the characterization of the therapeutic products in the bulk products that we're infusing. But I think these need to be worked in parallel.
It's one of the major topics that continues to come up around analytics. I think broadly it's sort of often put into a bucket of, but how do we better understand these processes in detail so we can link cause and effect and understand the impact of certain pieces of the process and what's inherent variability maybe due to the sort of variability of the patient starting material versus the human operator or conditions and trying to understand that interplay better. It's a little bit of a black box, it seems, today, and we're often operating in paper batch records and lab notebooks versus digital systems that might be able to help us with this. So what I heard you say, and that I fully agree with, is it's sort of we're dealing with academic processes often, manual driven, people driven processes, which tend to increase variability and cost. So if we can wring out some of those things and maybe digitize components of it, what's exciting for me is, if it takes you, I don't know, 7 to 10 years to develop a product and try and bring it through the clinical process, if we can try and shorten some of that, tech transfer time and that experimental design time where we can help you identify what's going to be the optimal process more quickly. Maybe we could shave a year or 2 years or who knows off the process. And that would be, getting more products into the clinic, knowing that we would have the ability to get them to patients if they make it through the clinical process. That for me is a huge goal for us, is to really work with academic researchers to design a platform that's flexible enough to do their research work, but also enabling scale ultimately. Because I don't know if you agree with this, and I don't want to be controversial necessarily, but I think sometimes the incentive alignment for academic research, obviously you often need to fund the grants and there's publications and these kinds of things. I'll ask it as a question to say, how often or is it common that academic researchers are thinking about manufacturing scale at those kind of early preclinical programs? I'm guessing there's other things they have to worry about at that stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you say, the gap is really in the funding. We find ourselves to be well funded into the preclinical research, and generally the valley of death is definitely in the process development and early validation and process qualification and validation runs where it's very difficult to get funding there if you are only operating on academic funding. So, and that's why we've built actually at Sloan Kettering many different partnerships with industry because we have more latitude in developing processes. I think it's always limited because companies want to get their clinical trials out yesterday. And everybody is always in a rush to get whatever best process you have today with really just incremental improvements. And so I find that it's very difficult in the academic setting to find a good way to be able to work on improving and dramatically and a clinical process and a clinical manufacturing process. There seem to be no entity who is able to devote the time and the funds. So I think potentially the networks that you were discussing before may help address also these gaps by pre-packaging a menu of different options based on the characteristics of the operation units that can be tailored to the need of of a new process being developed at an academic center. And I hope that will resolve some of those conundrums that we have to deal with, which sometimes kind of find us being pushed in a place where we know that potentially the manufacturing process is not completely optimized, and we would want to be able to do some optimization that cannot happen because of funding or time or both.
Yes, it often seems that kind of the things that attract funding um, are often, the most novel, the most leading edge, the most innovative, and maybe not some of the blocking and tackling pieces that would help us get these products to more patients and to commercialization. So hopefully, as you said, these networks and technologies like Ori can help front run some of that to not make it so hard to do some of that process development work.
Yeah, and I think also the scalability of the technology is really important
Mm.
because we find ourselves, doing a lot of the preclinical work in smaller units that do not have an equivalent in a large scale. I mean, large scales in terms of autologous, in our case, whereas we have done the most work, but I think also in the auto setting. I mean, so I think in both cases we're lacking some of the tools to do the process development with scalable technology from really the early time of the process development to the clinical scale.
A question for you, and I sort of have made this assertion before on the podcast, and I wonder what your view is to say, I mean, you were around probably, doing work in the field when, Jesse Gelsinger, some of the initial patient deaths that kind of put a chill on some of the adoption of cell and gene therapy potentially for a period of time while, clinical research continued on. My thought is that if we can't solve this scalability problem, how to bring these products to patients, what make them widely available, make them cost effective, that could pose an existential threat to the industry, to the modality. It could be seen as, oh, well, this is a nice science project. This isn't actually, the third pillar of medicine that you and I feel it is. So I wonder what your thought is. I mean, it's certainly, Rome wasn't built in a day, and there's lots of work to do. But ultimately, we're all in this to treat patients, and the huge amounts of capital that's flowing into cell and gene therapy. I think it was something on the order of 20 billion 2 years ago, something like 23 to 25 billion last year. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of capital chasing what's incredibly promising modality. But ultimately, these are for-profit companies that need to deliver an ROI to their investors. And how do we balance those things? How do we, is it an existential threat if in your view, if we can't make these products widely available for patients in a cost-effective way? Does that pose a threat to the industry in your view?
I mean, I think definitely if we were not able to extend the accessibility of the technology to even solid tumors today and to more patients, that would definitely pose a threat. But I'm very confident that we should be able to do that. I mean, right now in the allogeneic setting, we definitely are seeing some activity of these products in liquid tumors. And so I think there is some resolution on the horizon for being able to make larger batches. I mean, I don't know if these are going to address the needs of every patient for every diseases. Most likely not, specifically in the context, I think, of solid tumors. We're dealing with patients who have, for the most part, competent immune systems that will make it more difficult to implement the allogenic therapies there. So, which I think is an indication that there might be a longer term life for the providers of autologous therapies in the context of solid tumors, because I think at first we will need to really use the autologous system to develop new tools, signaling molecules, and combination therapies in these solid tumors. But I think that as we learn how to make these products in a more automated systems with better monitoring and digital monitoring and recording and tracking, we should be able to make them affordable. And maybe the models will have to change, and the profits on each product may not be what it is on a pill. But I think that there is no reason that these should not be enabled by an improvement in the technology. I mean, we have to remember that up to less than a decade ago, there was absolutely no technology that was devoted to these cell therapies per se. I mean, we started to adopt some of the technologies from the stem cell processing lab, which did not have any long-term culture, from the antibodies field, which do not have the same requirement. And slowly we are developing. We're seeing technologies that are being developed specifically for these cell therapies and for these personalized medicine. So I think we still have some work to do to and some time to really adapt the technology to these new type of therapies, and we need to give ourselves the time. If we would have given up on the approach after 10 years, we wouldn't be here today, and we had to overcome many of the pushbacks that we receive from every stakeholder, from the scientists to the clinicians to the engineers.
Another one of those overnight successes that took 30 years, right?
Exactly, exactly, and to the payers. So I think there should be ways. I mean, there is no doubt that if we can provide benefit to patients who have exhausted all standard of cares and today, and if we can also bring up these technologies early time point in the disease where the patients or have less tumor burden and have received less courses of immunotherapies, that we could also probably get results in more patients. So that would definitely relieve some of the cost of the treatments that these patients are receiving at the moment, and which are not optimal.
I mean, it stands to reason if we could harvest healthier immune cells earlier in the disease progression and use those as a therapy, that should be better. It should help. And it seems like some of the data coming out of Kite and others have demonstrated that these products would work well second line therapy or even earlier, which I think is all of our ambition, is to get the costs down far enough that we can make them widely accessible much earlier in the treatment pathway. You highlighted a question which I wasn't going to ask you, but I would love to know your opinion on, which is this allo versus auto debate. And, is it once we figure out allo, then it's all allo for forever, or is there some other mix that you might see where the two coexist? I'd be curious in your view of the future. What happens is there a peaceful coexistence? Some immune cells for some indications might work better in an auto format and others in an allo. What's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the hematological diseases where a lot of the patients actually are immunosuppressed, the allogenic products are more likely to work because they won't be rejected as fast as they would be rejected in a patient who is immunocompetent. And we know that having to provide immunosuppression to patients who receive these allo products is kind of a conundrum because you want to boost the immune system to get an anti-tumor effect, but you need to bring down the immune system in order to get these cells to engraft. So obviously, I'm sure we will over time improve the allogenic products, and this is a very active field of research. But as I mentioned, in the context of solid tumors, the immune system of those patients can be quite functional, and therefore I think that the autologous products and the proof of concept and what type of combination of receptors, CARs, co-receptors, will be efficient in eradicating these tumors and how to penetrate and overcome the suppressive microenvironment of these tumors will probably require, in my view, that we find tools that work with autologous cells before, because we will have, in the meantime, to solve the problem of the rejections of the allogenic products. So I think there is still time to develop technologies for autologous products, and also, probably potentially rare diseases where we won't need as much product, and where we will not have thousands of patients in need. The autologous setting, it's still probably will remain relevant. I think that one of the current thoughts also, which I know is very much pushed by the investors, and is the development of in vivo gene therapy. And there's been work done over the years to really unravel the potential of these approaches. I think that it's definitely a goal that should be there, because that's likely to be the place where we can decrease the cost of goods the most. However, I think the targeting will remain a challenge for many years, that we will need to do a lot more research on these grounds to be able to target the delivery of these lipid nanoparticles, or nanoparticles of any sort, shape, and flavors, in order to not flood the body with off-target expression of those materials that will improve the immune performance of the body. So I think that this is something that should be worked on, and will be, and is being worked on. And that may also help us in even our ex vivo approaches in terms of genetically modifying cells in a more efficient way. So there might be also benefits for our ex vivo approaches.
Great. No, that's an ambition it's great to close on that. What I heard you say was, it's not either allogeneic or autologous for the near future. It's probably both and rather than either or. And an in vivo ambition would be, I think, great, absolutely great for patients as well. And it's going to be a journey to get there. But I I agree with you. We've got plenty of runway to. I mean, as when I asked Bruce this question, he said, "Well, right now we've got proven autologous therapies. They've proven themselves in the clinic. They're clinically efficacious. We just need to make them make them better, more available, and then we'll work on all the other challenges in parallel." So, well, thank you so much. We're at the top of the hour. Greatly appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much. It's been great to see you, and look forward to having you as a member of our scientific advisory board. And we'll continue to stay in touch on the development of the Ori platform.